Well, good morning. Good to be with you. Merry Christmas, I guess. That's looks like it out there, right?
Merry Christmas.
Yeah. We're going to be in Matthew 17 today. We're going to pick up pretty quickly where we left off last week. We're in the story of a demon-possessed boy being freed from his oppression. We're going to start out in verse 14 in a second here. But Jesus and his disciples, they're still up in Caesarea Philippi, or up in the north near Mount Hermon. They might remember that place, Pan's Grotto, this pagan sacrifice place that was in front of a big cave at the foot of the mountain, and it was known as the Gates of Hell. And they're up there, and after tangling with the leaders in the land, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes several times, Jesus has taken his guys and he's gotten out of town for a little while. It's on this trip where Peter makes his famous proclamation, his confession, which leads Jesus to also make his own big proclamation. Jesus is asking his disciples who they think he is, and the people think there's some kind of resurrected prophet. That's what his disciples tell him. So he asked his disciples, okay, well, what do you guys think about who I am? And this is where Peter pipes up. Matthew chapter 16, verse 15, he said to them, "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Jesus seems pretty pleased with this, his Father being at work now on earth. After centuries of God's people being largely deaf and blind to their God and the wonders he's performed for them and in them, God is finally opening their eyes. He's finally opening their hearts to who he is and what he's doing. And Peter speaks the truth. Jesus, you're no resurrected prophet. You're the Messiah. You're the Son of God incarnate. And they are starting to agree here with the angels who announced his birth all those years ago. Remember when they appeared to the shepherds? What did the angel tell them? "Unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior who is Christ the Lord." That's 30 years ago now. The disciples are finally catching up. And as they stand in front of the gateway to hell, so to speak, as it was known, Peter proclaims this same thing. You are the Christ. You're the promised Messiah of God. And anyway, Jesus is pleased with what Peter says, and then he makes his own proclamation. In Matthew 16, verse 18, he says, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." The gates of hell won't be able to withstand it. Jesus says, "You're right, Peter. I am the Messiah. I am the Son of God, and I'm here to build a new assembly. I'm here to build a new congregation, a church, not like the assembly and the congregation that wandered in the wilderness, faithless and doubting and fearful, but a new congregation, one that will storm the gates of hell, one that will set the captives free." It's at this time that Jesus begins to teach his disciples how this is actually going to happen, and to teach in earnest what this means, what his plan is, what his Father's plan is. You can see in Matthew 16:21, from that time Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed on the third day be raised. The guys all know that Jesus is a wanted man. They know that the leadership in Jerusalem and Galilee are all trying to figure out how to bring him down, how to get rid of him for good, how to do that without getting in trouble with the Romans. And this is a part of the reason, actually, why Jesus is spending some time out of town, trying to keep a low profile, avoiding confrontations with those from Jerusalem. So when Jesus declares, "Yes, I am the Messiah, therefore I am soon going to Jerusalem to present myself to the ones who want me dead so that they can have what they want," well, the disciples would have been, "What are you talking about, Jesus?" Even when he says, "Don't worry, I'll be coming back to life after 3 days," they still can't get it. That's obvious because Peter objects to what Jesus is telling them right there. They seem to have selective hearing, kind of like my kids had when they were growing up. It's kind of like what Carolyn says I have sometimes. Jesus tells them, "I have to go to Jerusalem and die," and it seems like all they hear is Peter. This is all they hear. They can't get the resurrection part. And Peter's like, "May that never happen, Jesus." Anyway, it seems Jesus' emphasis on healing and driving out demons is fading into the past a little bit as he begins to focus on what's coming in Jerusalem. And his disciples are having a hard time keeping up. especially when he begins talking about what's in store for them in the future. For all those who want to follow him. Matthew 16:34, Jesus says, and calling the crowds to him with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. How popular is that message still today? That following Jesus means denying yourself and carrying your own cross to the point of death. Well, the disciples, see, they want the glory of the kingdom. They're shortly going to be arguing, right? Who's going to be the greatest in this coming kingdom? That's what they're looking forward to. Who's going to have the most glory? That's what they're thinking about. And Jesus is like, I got news for you, boys. Suffering comes before glory. Reality is everyone has to choose, right? The order of those things in their life still today. Suffering now and glory later, or glory now and suffering later. A lot of things in life like that. Want to stay healthy? You have to diet and watch what you eat and go to the gym and do healthy things. You suffer now for health later, benefits later. Want to learn something? You got to put in the time. You got to study. You got to suffer now for the benefits later. You got to let go of earthly treasures now for heavenly, eternal treasures later, Jesus says. We're all tempted to choose the other way, aren't we? We're all tempted to choose glory now. At least I do. Anyway, the disciples are at this time a mix of belief and unbelief. They believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who's going to bring in the new kingdom of God, but they don't understand that that means he is purposefully going to let himself be killed by his enemies in Jerusalem. And Jesus tells them straight up in verse 23 of Matthew 16, you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. You guys aren't thinking like God's thinking. The disciples confess, they proclaim Jesus is Messiah. Jesus tells them he's going to suffer and die. The disciples object. Jesus tells them that this is in store for him and for all who believe in him, suffering and death. Yeah, not a heartwarming, moving message from Jesus. But Jesus loves these guys. And he wants to help them out, and so does his Father. So this is when Jesus takes a few of his guys, Peter, James, and John, up on the high mountain, and he gives them a glimpse of what's on the other side of the suffering death. He gives them a glimpse of the glory to come. And Peter, James, and John hear the Father speak. They hear him declare about Jesus what Peter has just declared. Matthew 17:5, this is my beloved Son, my chosen one, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. God is like, I want to tell you myself, people. This is my Son. What he's telling you is true. Listen to him. He must go to Jerusalem and suffer and die and rise again. And that brings us to the story we saw last week. After the mountaintop experience, where just like centuries before, after their rescue from Egypt, God calls Moses up the mountain. When he gets a glimpse of the glory of God, what does Moses find when he descends back to his people? Failure, faithlessness. And the same kind of thing now happens to the new Moses. Jesus comes down off the mountain and finds his people failing, just like Moses did. A man has arrived where Jesus and Peter and James and John had left the other 9 disciples, and this man has brought his son, who is possessed by a demon. And the demon has afflicted this boy his whole life. Has countless seizures and has made him mute. And Mark tells us from childhood it has made him mute and has often cast him into the fire and into water to destroy him. What a terrible situation for this family. Constant struggle with this unclean spirit. Them constantly trying to protect their son from the demon that's constantly trying to harm and destroy him. Anyway, this man obviously heard the rumors, heard that Jesus is in town, heads out looking for him. Demon-possessed boy in tow, hoping for a miracle for his son. Well, this guy doesn't find Jesus, but he does find 9 of the 12 disciples hanging out at the foot of the mountain. And so he asks them, can you guys help get rid of this demon from my son? Well, apparently they give it a try. They've done it before. Jesus has not long ago sent them out on a mission to do that very thing. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2, giving them authority over unclean spirits. So they went out and proclaimed that people should repent, and they cast out many demons and anointed many with oil who were sick, and they healed them. Worked before. They used to do it, but something's different here. When this man asked them to do the same thing for his son, the disciples try and they fail. When Jesus comes down off the mountain, this is what the man tells them has happened. Matthew 17:14. And when they, Jesus and Peter, James, and John, came to the crowd, a man came up to him, kneeling before him, and said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he has seizures, and he suffers terribly. For often he falls into the fire, and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him. Why? Good question. That's exactly what the disciples asked Jesus. Seems like they're a little surprised by this. Seemed like maybe they expected to be successful in their endeavor to free this boy from this evil spirit. And look what they say to Jesus. After Jesus successfully dispatches the demon and frees the boy from its oppression, Matthew 17:19, then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not cast it out? Seems like they're genuinely puzzled. Like, why couldn't we do it? And Jesus answers, verse 20, he said to them, because of your little faith. Another translation of that limited, or that little, would be limited, because your limited faith. Jesus continues, he explains to them, verse 20, for truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. So what's the reason they can't cast this demon out? Their faith is too small. It's too limited. Jesus says, if you had faith even the size of a mustard seed, you could command mountains to go, and they would. But here they can't even command one demon to move on. So what does that say about their faith? Well, they don't have faith even the size of a mustard seed. Their faith is too little. It's too limited. It's not even that big. Why is their faith now too limited to cast demons out? Whereas not long ago, it was enough. Good question. I'm thinking maybe it's because, yes, they believe Jesus is the Messiah, but they don't yet believe what Jesus has begun to teach them. They don't understand yet or believe yet in his death and resurrection. That's the kind of faith that they need. That's the kind of faith that will move mountains. That's the kind of faith that will tear down the gates of hell. And they don't have that kind of faith yet. Just look at what Matthew says next in verse 22. As they were gathering in Galilee, they're on their way home from Caesarea Philippi. As they get back to Galilee, heading home, verse 22, as they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day. And they were greatly distressed. Why were they greatly distressed? Well, Mark tells us, Mark 9:30 says, then they went on from there and passed through Galilee. He was teaching his disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise. But they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him. Why were they greatly distressed? Because they don't understand what he's talking about. And they are afraid to talk to him about it. They're afraid to ask him, afraid to show their ignorance again. They didn't understand what Jesus was teaching them about the loaves and the fishes. They didn't understand what he was teaching them about the leaven and the Pharisees. And now they don't understand what he's teaching them now about dying and rising again. And they don't understand, and they won't until after it all happens. They will one day have the faith in the death and the resurrection of Jesus. The faith that will move mountains, but not yet. Not until after Jesus rises from the dead and explains it all to them again after the cross. They didn't understand or believe in him until he had risen from the dead. How many of his followers went to the tomb on Sunday morning after the third day? Only the women. And they only went to anoint his dead body. No one went looking for an empty tomb 3 days after he died. Anyway, back to the story. Matthew 17:24. When they came to Capernaum, when they got home from their road trip, When they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax went up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the tax?" Okay, so they're back home in Capernaum, and apparently Peter's out somewhere on the town when he's approached by some guys who have a question for him. So who are these guys? These are the collectors of the 2 drachma tax. So this is not a tax levied by the Romans. That's the first thing to know. This had to do with Jewish law. This had to do with the Torah. It's from Exodus 30. The Lord said to Moses, "When you take a census of the people of Israel, then each shall give a ransom for his life to the Lord when you number them, that there be no plague among them when you number them. Each one who is numbered in the census shall give this, half a shekel, as an offering to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered in the census from 20 years old and upward shall give the Lord's offering. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than the half shekel when you give the Lord's offering to make atonement for your lives. You shall take the atonement money from the people of Israel and shall give it for the service of the tent of meeting," it's the tabernacle, "that it may bring the people of Israel to remembrance before the Lord so as to make atonement for your lives." So every Israelite male, God tells them, 20 years old or more, is to make a contribution for the service of the tent of meeting, for the tabernacle, for its upkeep. A contribution of a half shekel. No one is exempt. The tabernacle may be God's house, but it's God's house on earth, and like everything else on earth, things wear out. Things need to be fixed. Things need to be replaced. And every Israelite was to make a contribution to that. This was a command of God that was carried on actually in the temple in Solomon's day. And in Jesus' time, with the temple now being so massive and so grandiose, it costs a lot of money to keep it up, and to keep up the function and the appearance of everything in the temple. And in Jesus' time, this had become an annual tax. So again, it's not a Roman tax. So these collectors, they're not tax collectors like Matthew was, hated by the Roman collaborator, as a Roman collaborator. These guys were working for the priests. This was part of the Torah, the law of the temple. And people could and would pay this tax at Passover or sometimes at another time or a feast when they were in Jerusalem. But there was a problem. According to the Torah, all able-bodied Jewish men were supposed to present themselves in the temple in Jerusalem 3 times a year. Twice in the spring at Passover and at Pentecost, and once in the fall at the Feast of Booths. But, question, given what we know about the faithfulness of Israel to the commands, the wishes of their God, do you think all Jewish men obeyed this? That all Jewish men every year went to Jerusalem 3 times a year? No, that didn't happen. Reality is lots of Jews did not go to Jerusalem every year. And therefore, they did not have the opportunity to pay the tax. The online bill payments weren't established quite yet. Well, the priests, they'd come up with a solution. They appointed collectors to travel through the land, collecting from everyone who hadn't made the trip to Jerusalem that year. So these guys are the ones who approach Peter. They're the collectors of the half shekel, the 2 drachma, that every Jewish man owed the temple annually. 2 drachmas, the modern day equivalent of the half shekel in Jesus' time. Anyway, it's these guys that approached Peter with the question. Now, given that these guys are from Jerusalem, they work for the temple, are they on Team Jesus? Yeah, no, they're not. And so do they have good intentions behind this question? No, they don't. What do they ask Peter? Verse 24, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax went up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the tax?" Seems like these guys think that this might be something else to complain about when it comes to Jesus. Something else they think that may prove Jesus is a lawbreaker. Right? They already call him the Sabbath breaker. They're already mad about that. They already complain about his lack of adherence to the traditions of the elders, the custom of the Pharisees. Remember the whole hand-washing fiasco or the lack of it? And now it looks like these guys are fishing for more dirt on Jesus. Here's another question. Jesus is about 30 years old at this time. Do you think he's paid this temple tax faithfully for the last 10 years? Would Jesus ever not obey anything his Father says? Of course he did. But he's been away, and apparently he's not paid his tax yet this year. And they're like, hey, Peter, does Jesus not pay the temple tax? See, there's a debate actually amongst the leadership about this tax. Who has to pay this tax and how often? And at this time, it was an annual tax, like I said, instead of when a census is taken. The priests, though, they're exempt from this tax. They work in the temple. Everybody agreed on that. But a big question in their day was, should rabbis also be exempt from this tax? Some said yes, some said no. Jesus is considered a rabbi. So the temple tax collectors seems like they want to know if Jesus pays this tax, or as a rabbi, does Jesus claim exemption from paying this tax? Does your teacher, your rabbi, not pay the tax? They ask Peter, and Peter answers yes. That's emphatic in the Greek. It's kind of like, yes, indeed, he does, or of course, or certainly. Like, of course he does, is Peter's answer. Verse 25, he said yes, and when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first. Okay, it could mean that before Peter says anything at all, walks in the house, Jesus starts talking. Totally possible. Jesus knows what's going on. He knows what's on people's minds. He always does. It could also mean that Jesus goes back and brings up this subject in front of everyone. Hey guys, I just ran into the temple tax collectors. They asked me if Jesus is going to pay the temple tax. I said yes. Is that the right answer? Anyway, before the debate begins, Jesus speaks up with a question of his own back to Peter. You can see verse 25. However this started, Jesus is going to ask a question. When he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, "What do you think, Simon?" Simon's Peter's given name. "From who do the kings of the earth take toll or tax?" That would be duties and taxes. "From their sons or from others? Who do the kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others?" Jesus said, "What do you think, Simon?" Calls him by his real name, not his nickname. His old name, not his new name. What's the answer to Jesus' question? From who do the kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others? How about you guys? What's the answer? Do the kings of the earth, the rulers, tax their own households? Do they tax their own families? No, they don't. Kings, the rulers on earth, take from others, from the people, to gain for themselves and theirs. But you think, well, that's 2,000 years ago, Dan, not like today. They didn't have what we have, a democracy where everyone pays taxes like we do. Totally structured, everyone equally responsible. In those days, if you ran the place, you did all the collecting and none of the paying. If you were part of the ruling class, part of the powers that be, the government, you didn't pay like everyone else pays. You had privileges over the common folk. Like I said, totally unlike today. This is just the way things still work, isn't it? Throughout human history. This is just how it works. All governments, all kings serve themselves. They use their position to gain for themselves and their house and their friends and their colleagues. The kings of the earth tax others for the benefit of their own sons. That's what Jesus is pointing out. Humans who gain authority over others will undoubtedly use that authority to benefit themselves and those of their tribe. They'll use their authority to gain and maintain advantage over others. Powers that be, whoever, wherever, and whenever they are always in it for themselves and their own at the expense of others. Those on the inside of the ruling group exploit their position to gain advantages and resources from those outside the ruling group. If anyone's not sure about that, I don't know what to tell you. Read some history books, because this is just the way it works. It's always the way humans work. There is always an us and them at work, working behind the scenes. Sometimes not even behind the scenes. Sometimes right out in the open. How else do politicians in our day who make, 150, 200K a year, acquire millions and millions of dollars in personal wealth while being public servants. Go look up the net worth of the people that you see on the news every day. That info's available. It's right out in the open. Everyone sees this. Everyone knows this, and we just accept that that's how things work. That's how human authority, human government of every kind has always worked. Humans with authority will use and abuse others for the advantage of their own families and their own allies. This is the natural progression of all of humanity throughout all time when it comes to political rulers. They exploit the people in order to disadvantage their adversaries and advantage their family and friends. God warned his people about this reality way back in Samuel's day. 1 Samuel 8, let me just read this. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "Appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations." But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. According to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice, only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. And he said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers, and he will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and your female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourself, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." God's like, you want to be like the other nations? You want a king like they have? Fine. Tell the people they can have what they want, but they're not going to like it. Have your way, but no, your king and his household, his family and his servants will be like the kings of the nations then. They too will acquire wealth and retain their power by taking from the people. Were God's predictions true? Did Samuel's words prove true? Did the kings and princes of Israel act like the kings of the other nations? Yes, they did. If you've been here on Wednesday night, you'll know this. It's been part of the reason God's judgment falls on his people in his land in Ezekiel's day. Ezekiel warns everyone God's judgment is coming, largely for this reason. Ezekiel 22 says, "The conspiracy of her prophets is still in her midst. It's like a roaring lion tearing the prey. They have devoured human lives. They have taken treasure and precious things. They have made many widows in her midst. Her princes in her midst are like wolves tearing the prey, shedding blood, destroying lives to get dishonest gain. And her prophets have smeared whitewash for them, seeing false visions and divining lies for them, saying, 'Thus says the Lord God,' when the Lord has not spoken. They have practiced extortion and committed robbery. They have oppressed the poor and needy and have extorted from the sojourner without justice. Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, even to the shepherds, 'Thus says the Lord God, ah, shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding yourselves. Should you not, shepherds, feed the sheep? You eat the fat. You clothe yourself with the wool. You slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. The weak you have not strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the injured you have not bound up, the strayed you have not brought back, the lost you have not sought, and with force and harshness you have ruled them." In the words of Solomon, there is nothing new under the sun. And there is nothing new in the 500 years since Ezekiel's day to this day and this conversation here with Peter and Jesus. And it won't be long before Jesus is standing in the temple causing a huge scene over this very issue. It says in Matthew 21:13, he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers." He's going to tell the scribes and Pharisees, tell the crowds about them. Going to say they preach, but they do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move a finger to help them. You've neglected justice and mercy and faithfulness. They clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside are full of greed and self-indulgence. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. The leaders in Israel in Jesus' time are just like the leaders in Ezekiel's day. They are not exempt. They do this too, and they're still doing it now in Israel and in Capernaum. What's the answer to Jesus' question? From who do the kings of the earth take their toll or tax, from their sons or from others? The kings of the earth tax others for the benefit of their own sons. If you're in power, you never tax your own son. On the contrary, if you're in power, you give every advantage you can to your own son. When Jesus asked this question, it's almost rhetorical. Everyone knows the answer. What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take toll or tax, from their sons or from others? And when he said from others, Jesus said to him, then the sons are free. Jesus is like, you're right, Peter. The sons of the king do not have to pay taxes and duties, do they? Who's supposed to be the king of Israel? Whose kingdom is this supposed to be? Yeah, God. This is God's kingdom. This is the Father's kingdom. Psalm 42:7, for the Lord, the Most High, is to be feared, a great king over all the earth. Therefore, who does not owe any taxes? The Son doesn't have to pay the tax. That's what Jesus is pointing out. My dad is king of the universe. He doesn't want any tax payments from me. The 2 drachma tax was for the upkeep of the temple. That's not something my Father wants me to pay. This is his house, so it's my house too. I'm the son. Verse 27. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you'll find a shekel. Take it and give it to them for me and for yourself. Okay, this is pretty strange, gotta say. Before we get to the coin dispensing fish, though, notice what Jesus is saying. I don't owe this tax to the temple. But, not to give offense to them, the collectors and who they work for, I want to pay it anyway. Why? Well, it could be maybe it's just not time to have this fight yet. Jesus may be thinking, I'm not here to overthrow the powers that rule this land yet. I'm not here to replace the rulers on earth yet. We've already heard Jesus has another agenda right now. There is something else that he has come to do first, another priority, the thing the disciples can't quite grasp yet. He's come to suffer and die at the hands of the regime, not to lead a tax rebellion against them. Still, nothing today has changed with the rulers of this world, and nothing has changed with our job yet either. We're not here to overthrow the government. We are here to have and to give to others a grain of faith to the people of this world. A grain of faith in the death and resurrection of Jesus. A grain of faith that can move mountains. That's what moves kingdoms, mountains, faith in the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So Jesus says, I'm not here to make the temple tax an issue, Peter. And even though I don't need to, I'm going to pay it just like everyone else. Verse 27, so Peter, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you'll find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself. Peter, go catch a fish and you'll find a shekel in its mouth. That's 2 half shekels. Go and pay the collectors, half a shekel for you and half a shekel for me. Not the most common way to go about getting money. It's almost like Jesus is doing some kind of magic trick here, isn't it? Is he? Is Jesus here using his power for his own advantage? Does Jesus, the King of Kings, the ruler of heaven, ever do anything to gain anything for himself? He only does things for his Father. He only does things for others. This is why he came, to give himself up for others. Philippians 2 says he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, but being born in the likeness of man and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. Is Jesus cutting corners here? Is he using his power to gain something for himself? Money to pay the tax man? Money that he didn't have to work for? Of course not. What's he doing by this? By giving Peter this strange assignment to go get a coin out of the mouth of a fish? A couple things to think about. What is this tax for again? The upkeep of the temple. Remind me, how pleased is Jesus with the temple and what's going on in there? Yeah, not pleased at all. He has a lot to say about how bad things are with the temple and those who run it. In fact, have we not heard Jesus promise that the temple is shortly going to become obsolete? Isn't that what he told the woman at the well? We're going to find out in Matthew 24, he informs his disciples as they're admiring the big temple complex. Jesus says, you see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Why should Jesus pay a tax for the upkeep of a temple bound for destruction, for the temple that he has come to make obsolete? Jesus is the true temple of God. He is the place on earth where God dwells. And he's come to suffer and die so that all who would believe in him could become a part of the true temple of God. As his followers, we and the disciples before us are now the temple. 1 Corinthians 3 says, do you not know that you are God's temple? 1 Corinthians 6, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? 1 Peter 2:5 says, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a royal priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Jesus has come to build a new temple. And here are these guys asking for money to keep the old temple going. And Jesus has no interest in that program. And even though he pays the tax, he's not interested in paying for the old temple and its perpetuation. And he's not interested in his followers, his disciples, paying for it either. Why? Because they are going to be adopted into his family. They're soon going to be sons of the kingdom. And because he's come to build a new temple out of them. Who's going to pay for the construction of this new temple? Is there going to be some kind of new temple tax? Who's going to pay for the maintenance of this new temple? Who pays for everything necessary to have this new temple? Who pays for the forgiveness and the cleansing necessary to establish and found this new temple? Jesus is. The sons of God's kingdom don't pay for the temple. The only begotten Son pays because he's the only one who can. The sons of the kingdom are free. There's no temple tax needed for the temple that Jesus has come to build. Verse 27, however, not to give offense to them, go to the sea, cast a hook, take the first great fish that comes up. Why does Jesus ask Peter to do this? Why doesn't he just make a coin? Right? Why doesn't he have Peter look under the rug or under the rock or dig in the garden? Remember what started this whole story? They've just returned back from Capernaum after their big road trip. Remember what prompted the big road trip in the first place? You can see it in Matthew 16:1. And the Pharisees and Sadducees came, and to test him, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. And do they really want a sign? No, they want Jesus to fail. What did Jesus tell them? No sign for you guys except what? Matthew 16:4, you can see it. An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. He's already told them this a few times. Matthew 12, he tells the scribes and the Pharisees, for just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And Jonah gets swallowed by a great fish. How did Jonah end up in the water? Remember that? Jonah is thrown into the sea so that the others on the boat can live. And a great fish swallows him. And 3 days later, it spits him up on the shore. And Jesus is always teaching his guys. And he wants them to know, unlike the Pharisees and the scribes, Jesus wants to give his guys signs of who he is. Just think about, first, the absolute sovereignty of this miracle. A shekel dropped at the right place in the right time. That a fish would scoop it up in its mouth, most likely with its eggs. There's a fish in the Sea of Galilee that does that. That Peter would throw his line in at the right time and place to catch this one particular fish with the coin in its mouth. These things have been set in motion long before Peter arrives on the shore that day. In this miracle, Jesus makes a way to provide for the tax for the building, the upkeep of the old temple, for both himself and for Peter. But that's just a picture of what Jesus is really here to do. He's going to pay the temple tax on Peter's behalf and his own. He's going to do away with it all once and for all on all his followers' behalf. And he's going to pay the price of the building of the new temple of God. And here he gives his guys a preliminary sign of Jonah. Out of the mouth of the fish comes payment for the old temple's tax. But soon, out of the mouth of the earth is going to come payment for the new and eternal temple. Jesus talks about the sign of Jonah quite a bit. Interesting. What was Jonah doing when he was in the belly of the fish? Was he alive? Well, this is what he wrote about what happened to him. Just listen to this for a second. This is Jonah 2. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All your breakers and your waves passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight, yet I shall look again upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head. To the roots of the mountains I went down, to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with a voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out on the dry land. Just like Jonah sacrificed himself so that those in the boat could live, and called out to God from the deep, from the abyss, from Sheol. And God answered, and Jonah came alive out of the fish 3 days later. Jesus is going to sacrifice himself. He is going to enter the deep. He is going into the abyss, into Sheol, under the mountains, and 3 days later emerge having purchased his new temple. And here he again gives his disciples a little sign, a little picture of what he is doing, a little picture of the promised sign of Jonah that's coming soon. Payment is coming. Payment in full for the price of the old temple and to do away with it, and payment in full for the price of the eternal, new, and living temple of God. One more thing. Moses spoke about a king too, long before Samuel was ever even born. Talked about this when they were not even in the promised land yet. It says this, Moses is speaking to the people in Deuteronomy 17. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me. God knew that 400 years before they even asked. When that happens, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. Did that happen? Did they ever have a king like that? In fact, what's their greatest king known for? Solomon? Known for all of that. God continues through Moses speaking about his king. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Was there ever a king like that in Israel? Not even David. He was a type. He was just a picture of a true king, the Son, who will pay the cost of his new temple and pay the cost of his new kingdom, and who will write out the law directly onto the hearts of his people by the power of his own blood, the power of his suffering, death, and resurrection, which will give his brothers and sisters faith that can move mountains. The Son who will continue long in his kingdom, he and his brothers and sisters who he has paid for, because the sons of the kingdom are free, and they will be forever.